Okay, so thank you so much for coming to our session today. So before I start, I like to acknowledge that, since the Derek Chauvin trial for killing George Floyd has been undergoing, nations, especially Black and Brown communities are relieving the pain and trauma of killing of George Floyd, and also, recent senseless killing of Dante Wright, add more pain to existing trauma. So although our presentation is about xenophobia and anti-Asian hate, I hope that our session helps you expand your understanding of different ways of systemic racism works against all different groups, and hopefully use this as an opportunity to have conversation about how we build solidarity to fight against white supremacy and systemic racism. So yeah, and I also say thank you to Eliza and May and also Katie for preparing for today's presentation. So Katie worked hard to prepare for this presentation. However, she has a family emergency, so she wasn't able to be here at this moment. So, but I really appreciate of her doing a lot of work for this presentation. And also, I just give a little bit of background related to this is that so Eliza and May and Katie, they are in my social problems classes, and one of the assignments for the class is to doing like course project about social justice, and so this is kind of part of their course project, and so I'm so grateful, Eliza and May, that they went really beyond just doing this for the course and was sharing this entire community. So thank you so much, May and Eliza. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit and then get started?
So I'm Eliza Lester. I'm a senior environmental studies major. And yeah, I'm in Professor Gill's social problems class. So
I'm May. I'm a sophomore here. I'm majoring in sociology, actually. So it was really, really interesting to study this, and I hope you guys appreciate this presentation.
okay. So do you want to start?
Yeah, I can take Katie's. So we decided to start this off with a privilege activity. Now we're gonna have you put a finger down, and if you want to do it, you can share the camera, but obviously since this is a topic about privilege, it's very personal. And if you don't want to share that, obviously it's completely fine. We will be having a discussion where you don't have to share your number afterwards. But Liza and I, if she wants to, she'll share her number, and then I'll share my number, and then we can have a conversation about it. So there's 2 slides of this, each with a different vibe, I guess, of questions. So we'll start with the first slide. So put a finger down if you have ever been asked if you understand English. Put a finger down if you were ever assumed to be an automatically bad driver. Have you ever been asked why your nose is flat? Were you told that your skin is yellow? Have you been told hide your cats and dogs so you won't eat them? Have you been blamed for the pandemic or heard China virus or Kung flu? Were you automatically assumed to be amazing at math? I forget how many are on the other slide. I don't know if, do you know how many automatically? I don't know if it's
7.
Because that's, okay. Then it's not gonna be, then we'll go back and then we'll change the number of hands.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think as we've all kind of gathered here that they are targeted, but not exclusive to Asian stereotypes. I can't see everyone and I don't want to assume race, but I know I have more than half my fingers down. So I think for me, as an Asian American, I do feel privileged in many ways. However, these stereotypes I know are really seen as overlooked and maybe not as bad as other people's. And so it kind of almost invalidates people's feelings and the hurt that they can cause. If anyone wants to share their numbers or their thoughts about this first slide, you can just unmute yourself. You don't have to raise hands since we're a small group. If no one has anything to say, we can go on to the next one. Yeah.
Okay, so for me, I didn't put a finger down at all. Sorry. Yeah, I can't say I've had any of these like accusations or questions brought up to me. So, yeah, it's kind of eye-opening to see that like none of this whatsoever applies to me. So that's another aspect of privilege that I have. It's really that I think is really important to think about.
I think a lot of these things, as we're going through the next slide, they're just not on people's radars. It's if you don't really have to deal with it or it's not taught about in school, it doesn't happen to you. I think, of course, you're not even going to be aware of it, but I think bringing these to light is really important. So if you want, you can go to the next slide. All right. So put a finger down if anyone has attributed your academic success to your race. Have you ever struggled figuring out a Halloween costume because you can't think of any iconic roles played by a person of your race? Have you ever been told that you're pretty for your race? Has anyone ever tried to date you because of your race and sexual stereotypes that come with your race? Have you ever felt embarrassed to be your race? Has anyone ever shamed you for your cultural food that you brought for lunch? And have you ever felt the need to say self-deprecating jokes about your race to feel valid by those around you? These are a bit heavier questions. So I know for me, I have all but one fingers down. And I think some of these are deeper that like we've kind of heard about. But I think the one that no one really thinks about is just like the simple one, like about Halloween costumes and not having any real true iconic Asian role models or characters that you can truly relate to. If anyone wants to share any of their thoughts, please feel so. You don't have to share your number or anything.
Yeah, the one that stood out to me the most was, has anyone ever shamed you for cultural food that you brought for lunch? I've experienced that a lot, but with actually people within the Latinx culture and the community, so that was also very interesting, like shaming within the community in that sense. So, just something to point out.
Yeah, no, definitely.
In that sense, like, do you think it's kind of related to the last question, like feeling the need to say self-deprecating jokes about your race to feel validated by others? Like, do you think that's a reason why maybe even people of your own race, like, kind of comment on that stuff?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. But also like they have their own personal reasons too for doing that. But I think that's one of the main reasons why. I also think because it was someone who of Mexican heritage, so I thought that was also like very interesting to just put it in there because there's been a lot of xenophobia within like Mexicans against Central Americans as well. So that's something like within its own dynamic as well.
Yeah, of course. These are questions I think a lot of people of color in general can relate to. And I think that's one thing that's really important for everyone who's a person of color to realize that we all have the same struggles. They may be in different severities and everything, but everyone's struggling in some way, and we all need to uplift each other, I think. If anyone well, not last chance, obviously, but any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, we can go.
So I'm just gonna give a quick background on xenophobia. Basically, xenophobia is the dislike or prejudice against people from other countries. And oftentimes it can be associated with fear and other emotions like that. So the history of anti-Asian hate and racism has basically existed forever. There's a lot of events that kind of show this, and one of those is the court case People versus Hall, which was in 1854, and the California Supreme Court ruled that people of Asian descent couldn't testify against a white person in court. So basically, this guaranteed any white person a get out of jail free card if the person testifying against them, the only person available was Asian. So, and any anti-Asian crimes or hate crimes, those were pretty much disregarded because of that court case. And then there was the Chinese massacre of 1871, which was following the murder of a white man who was caught in crossfire between rival Chinese groups. And then as a result of that, over 500 white and Hispanic rioters lynched at least 17 Chinese men and boys, hanging them in various locations downtown. And then there was also the Rock Springs Massacre in 1885, and then Japanese internment during World War II. But so one of the events that I kind of highlighted because of where we are right now in society with the pandemic and everything, I found the San Francisco plague outbreak of 1900, which was when there was a bubonic plague outbreak in San Francisco. And it's likely that it began with a ship from Australia, but the first stateside victim of the outbreak was a Chinese immigrant. So basically the entire Asian community was blamed for it as a result. And that kind of made me think a lot about the coronavirus pandemic, because a lot of people are associating that with the Asian race and kind of blaming the whole population for it. And a recent study indicates that the anti-Asian hate crimes have spiked 150% since the coronavirus pandemic first began. So that's kind of a shocking statistic. So in 1882, on the night of the greatest wave of immigration in American history, the president signed a piece of federal legislation called the Chinese Exclusion Act. And unlike any law enacted since the founding of the Republic, this federal legislation singled out one specific race and nationality for exclusion and made it illegal for any Chinese workers to come to America. And for those who were already here, it made it impossible for them to ever become a citizen of the US. The act was basically fueled by issues over race, class, and national identity. And this was just the first in a long line of acts targeting the Chinese for exclusion. And this act remained enforced for more than 60 years. These acts and efforts to exclude a single race and nationality really raised the question of whether the US government really was serious about their values that all men were created equal, or if they all cared about if all they cared about was white purity. The Chinese didn't passively accept the unfair treatment, but rather used tools like judicial system to challenge the laws, and the Chinese immigrants quickly learned to use courts as a venue to fight for their rights, and they also protested against racial discrimination in other ways, such as through media and petitions.
So this quote is one that I got from a survey that I took for the research project. And in response to just a question that I asked if they felt like that there's really support, or if people really understood or cared, or if they thought they were getting any support from anyone. And they said no one has cared, and it is still that way. And I thought that was really powerful, because even though this opinion was, for my research project, a minority opinion amongst the Asian American community, it is still one that has really resonated with me. And it's a very powerful opinion, because clearly someone does not feel like society thinks they matter. And I think that's something, as we go on and in this not survey, in this presentation, it's going to be clear why they feel so invisible to society. But I think it's an opinion and a feeling that needs to be addressed, because even though it's a minority opinion, still at least one person feels like society doesn't care about what's going on with the Asian American attacks. And so I think it's just something to be aware about. So here are,
yeah.
oh,
Sorry. So these are just a bunch of screenshots that I took from various news articles, just to kind of show like the recent spike in anti-Asian hate crimes since the pandemic. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, I think this one on the left, it's a screenshot of the video. Oopsies, sorry. Of the like 53-year-old, I think, or 63-year-old Asian woman who was like kicked and beaten outside of a store in New York City. That one was big. And then there was the Atlanta spa attacks, but there's been so many others that haven't made as big of a impact in the news recently. It's definitely worth checking out, and it's really just kind of mind-boggling how many incidents there have been.
sorry, I was muted. So this is another quote that I got from my survey, and I asked how the Asian American community specifically has felt and how they've been affected by these increased attacks. And one quote that really stood out to me was, "I am now constantly anxious and afraid to get hate crimes." And this one stood out to me because I can personally relate to this, although I have never, thankfully, been called out or attacked because of my race. I have been avoiding public transportation. When I went into Boston with my white friend, I was going to take the train back to my house to save her on gas, but she was like, "No, I'm driving you. I don't want you to take public transportation." And so it's just something that is now something that we used to be able to ignore and think, "Oh, that's not happening to us." It is happening to us, and it's now on the forefront of our minds. And even though there are some people that, like me, that have been able to avoid it, the fear is still prevalent, because most of us do know a family member or a friend who has been personally attacked or called out by people who have very strong feelings of hatred toward us.
So this is just an article that I came across that has a video I wanted to share. Sorry, let me just get to the tab. Oops. Where did it go? There it is. Okay. So I'm gonna share this real quick.
As Blaine mentioned, most of those killings in the Georgia shootings were Asian women, and it all comes at a time of increased attacks on Asians and Asian Americans across the U.S. Just yesterday, the group Stop AAPI Hate released new data saying it recorded nearly 3,800 anti-Asian hate incidents between March of last year and February of this year. I want to bring in Kimmy Yam, who
When you muted, it muted the video.
Nature of these
Sorry.
attacks.
Yeah, so, the report came out yesterday. It logged about 3,800 incidents, and these range kind of between, more microaggressions to also verbal attacks and, also physical attacks. This is over a span of roughly 12 months in the pandemic. And compared to the report that came out last year, it's about 1,000 incidents up from what we were seeing. The report last year kind of spanned over the course of 5 months in the pandemic. The group, however, does caution against saying that what we're seeing is a surge or using any sort of time analysis when we're talking about this, because we know that there is a clear issue with underreporting in the community. I know that, there are oftentimes language barriers to reporting these sorts of incidents. There's also mistrust of law enforcement or other types of, these reporting forums, and also just, an overall lack of awareness sometimes from people in the community that these resources exist. But truly, this is something that, while we can't say there's necessarily a surge, experts do mention that it's clear that none of the discrimination and racism that Asian Americans have been facing throughout this pandemic has really abated.
Yeah, Kimmy, the new report also shows that a disproportionate number of attacks have been directed at women. Tell us more about that.
Right. So according to the report, women are about 2.3 times, they report 2.3 times more than men. The report showed that 68% of respondents were women compared to roughly 29% who were men. And experts say that this really reflects this sort of racialized type of sexism that Asian American women face. Asian American women face a lot of public safety issues, even when we're not in a pandemic. This is definitely exacerbated now that we are in one. And Asian American women have dealt with harassment, prior to the pandemic as well. As mentioned in a lot of the reports, there is this intersection of racism and sexism, and along with statements like "go back to your country." This is accompanied by a lot of misogynistic language that also plays into it. So there really is this sort of intersectional dynamic going on.
Kimmy, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Okay, so
There's a surge of almost 15.
get back to the presentation. Sorry. Okay, so you want to take this one, May?
Yeah, we can continue on. So this, I think some people will be familiar with this term, some people won't, but it's called the model minority. So in some of the research that I've been doing,
Sorry.
You know what, it's totally fine. We're just gonna keep rolling with it. It's fine.
It's okay, Eliza.
I don't know what's going on here.
Technology is hard. It's okay.
Technology.
Okay.
But the model minority was really an idea created by white society. It's the desirable classmate, the favored neighbor, a non-threatening kind of person of color. And another person described it to be invisible in most circumstances, to prove the success of capitalism, but bear the blame when it fails. So this idea was really to divide people of color and really pit us against each other. So they made us the model and saying, oh, look at the Asians, they're doctors, they're engineers, they're scientists, look at how successful they can be. And then they turned it around to blame Black and brown people, saying, why can't you be more like them? You're lazy, you're this, you're that, and really putting us on a pedestal. However, this pedestal that they put us on is not equal to white people, and it's clear, especially now. During economic downturn, Asians are usually the ones to bear the blame for it. And now this model minority has made people think, oh, Asians are as equal to white people, when that's not the case. And so that makes the microaggressions that we feel make us feel that, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, why am I upset about this? They don't mean it in that way. But as some people mentioned with microaggressions, it's not about the intent, it's about the impact of microaggressions. And one thing that's a big problem about the model minority is that it not only separates people of color, but one problem in our community that we definitely have to work on is recognizing the pedestal that we have been on, and that the system that keeps us high keeps our other people of color low. And we've mostly in the past taken the white side of problems. However, that needs to stop, and we need to say, we need to recognize that we are still being oppressed by white supremacy, and we need to be with our other fellow POC brothers and sisters and fight with them and uplift them, so that the pillars of white supremacy can finally fall, and we can finally get the justice that we deserve. We finally get the rights and equalities that we deserve, and we prevent these microaggressions that happen against the Black communities, Latino communities, and Asian communities. So, have you ever made jokes about yourself or others in your race involving stereotypes of your race to gain white approval? This really goes along with the model minority, because when that pressure is placed on us, we feel the need to assimilate, and not only assimilate, but assimilate better than other people of different races. So that leads to a lot of self-deprecating jokes. I know I am definitely part of this yes column. So as you can see, out of about 20 Asian Americans who have taken this test, 16 of them have said yes, that they have made these jokes. And usually for me, when I'm in the past, when I have made these jokes, it has been with my all white friends. And it's something to show them like, oh, I am not harmful. I am like you. I can make jokes about this too. I'm the fun one. I'm funny. I don't take these things seriously. When in reality, these are serious topics, and they do need to be addressed and not taken lightly. So this quote has also really resonated with me, and because the survey is anonymous, I don't know who this is, but I'm going to assume that this one is a girl or identifies as female, and she has said, "Sometimes being Asian makes me feel inherently less pretty. I don't like dressing up for Halloween because I don't look like my favorite characters. When shopping for clothes, I've always had to think about if the color would look bad on my skin tone. I've talked myself out of dyeing my hair because I've only seen it look good on pale skinned people. Sometimes I even consider plastic surgery when I'm feeling insecure about my wider Southeast Asian nose." So this one really resonated with me, because when I was little, I definitely looked up to the only beauty standard we really had at that time, and which was white, skinny, and pale. And so a lot of people have on the survey said that there was a time that they have been embarrassed to be Asian, and I definitely can agree with that. And then when I asked another question was, do you still feel embarrassed? Most said no, but at least 5 people said yes, that they still do sometimes feel embarrassed to be Asian. And I definitely think that comes with not only the white beauty standards, but also with the stereotypes and model minority of Asians. So while they can say, oh, look how successful we are, and they use sexual stereotypes that come with our race, we are still not as good as the white woman. The white woman is the epitome of beauty. And so that's why we have a lot of Asian people, especially Asian girls, who wish that they had more white-centric facial features. Sorry, I had loud family members. But these next two slides are questions that I asked white people, Black people, anyone who didn't say they identified as Asian, if they ever did any of these. Some of them are microaggressions, some of them are clearly flat out racist comments. But what really struck me was that for every single example that I gave, and I gave 13, but there's plenty more, at least 2 people have done one of these aggressions to someone else. And I think that is really stark, because you have what I call the classics. So you have making fun of the Asian accent, the dog eating jokes, and mocking the eyes of Asian descent. Those are definitely what I call the most popular. So that's 20, 22, 18, 24 people have said that they've done that. Then you have the ones that aren't as well known or what I consider mainstream, yet they still had a decent number of people who did it. So they used COVID-19 jokes or yellow fever jokes as a pickup line for those of Asian descent. Clearly, this is more than a microaggression, and I've had this done to me several times. So I am not surprised that the number is 6, but I am disappointed. And I think one of the best parts about this survey was that it was done anonymously, so that people feel comfortable being honest. And I'm glad that they're feeling honest about this. But it also shows that there needs to be a change. Now, I didn't include the question that I asked next was, do you think these are wrong? So a majority of the people said that all of them were wrong. So there is progress being made. However, you still have those people that said, oh, only some of them are wrong, or most of them are okay to say. So while we still have been making progress, and hopefully if I had asked, do you still say or do any of these things, hopefully the numbers would be lower, but there's still progress to be made. And then if you want, you can go to the last slide, Eliza. So this is also a very hopeful piece of data. It says, do you think it is important to participate in movements such as Stop Asian Hate? And over 100 people have said, yes, it's important. And I think that shows progress. So we need to speak up and spread awareness, because it shows that it's working. The people are hearing about this and they're wanting to learn about this. And it should be built into the curriculum, because a lot of people don't actually know the racism that many Asian Americans have experienced. And we also want to take this time and say it's important to participate in other people of color's movements, such as Black Lives Matter movement, and advocacy needs to be intersectional. And we need to show that white supremacy against any person of color is not okay, and it cannot be tolerated. So that concludes the slides. We really want to open it up to questions or thoughts and have a really good conversation about this.
Eliza, can you unshare the screen so that we can be in the big room?
Huh?
Can you unshare the screen?
Oh, unshare it? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for the great presentation. It was really interesting. So what any thoughts or questions?
It could even just be like, wow. It could be this we did throw a lot
Yeah.
of information at you. We did and that was a lot of information. So it's okay if you want to like take time and settle, collect your thoughts. That's totally fine.
Yeah, even like any like personal observations or comments or things you can like relate to some of the questions and surveys that May did.
I have a comment. This really great research. It's a fantastic structure as well. So it was really great to listen to that. Thank you very much. I'm currently studying sociology in Germany, and I'm a Stonehill alum. That's how I got here. It all makes sense, I promise. But I was listening to the model minority myth and just having a lot of German history in my head. It was also making me think of anti-Semitism in the German history context, and it made me interested to find out about it was very interesting to hear about the model minority myth and think about that in relation to anti-Semitism. But I also found out a little bit about the history of Asian hate in Germany. Just while I was listening, I found a little news article for you that I've just put in the chat if you're interested. So there's a little bit about Asian hate in Germany, the similar structure to your research, and it also has to do with racist stereotypes currently in COVID. So I just wanted to share that as well.
No, thank you so much. I'll definitely look into that. So Carly said, how do you feel that the Stonehill community has changed in the wake of the pandemic? Do you see active allies, passive bystanders, or people perpetuating the racism that you've discussed? I have a little trouble answering this just because I've been remote for over a year. What I do find with the Stonehill community is that often I am the only person of color in classrooms at times. However, I thankfully personally have not had to face microaggressions relating to my race from any teachers or students. However, there have been some scares with with one of my friends. This one person, he was like, hey, you look really familiar. She did not recognize him at all. And she was like, oh no, don't, this better not be like all Asians look alike type of thing. Thankfully it wasn't, but I have been mistaken for her actually a few times. And while I love her, we don't look anything alike. So it's little things like that. On social media, I have been seeing very active voices from Stonehill calling out and saying that you can't just post about it, you have to actually participate in it. And I have been seeing a lot of teachers speak up, whether it be against Asian American hate or speaking up about BLM, white supremacy as a whole issue. I've definitely seen that to be more prevalent as time goes on, which I think is really really important. I don't know if anyone here is of Asian descent and is actually on campus and if they want to talk about it or not. But yeah, I'm kind of sad that I'm not on campus. So my remote makes me a little bit too distant.
So anyone wanted to share your thoughts related to what Carly asked in the chat room? I mean, I'm not on campus either, so I cannot really say what's going on. But however, I think it is really great to see, especially like Asian student groups such as the 48 Club or Asian American Society, having more vocal and speak up about anti-Asian racism on campus through releasing their statements and also organizing all different events with OIA. I think that's really great because I have been in Estonia for about 8 years. Whenever we have like Asian Heritage Month, in April, I really don't recall doing like things other than Genki performance, in fact. So even though we're struggling with lots of issues, so I thought that like again, still in the past Asian Heritage Month was more dedicated to like cultural aspects of Asian heritage rather than like systemic racism that Asian communities have been undergoing. So however, this like pandemic seems to be changed a little bit of paradigm in terms of how those experiences and understanding of Asian communities brought into the community. Basically, I think that a lot to do with the a lot of activism from the students.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's been talked about a lot more. I'm on campus, but I'm not of Asian descent, so I can't say I probably don't pick up on as much as someone who's the target of like these stereotypes and comments and stuff would be. But I like, at least with in terms of my professors and stuff, I've noticed since all this kind of like these big events have been happening this past year and with the pandemic and everything, I think a lot more teachers are more aware and kind of raising, like bringing up those topics for conversation, because they're really important. And I think that's kind of starting to become more apparent to people, especially professors and those who are educating people.
Any other thoughts or?
I was thinking about because during the presentation, I mean, there's a lot of specific like topics that we talked about, model minority myth and this research that you've done, and I was just thinking about like how do we how do we expose students who aren't like getting, because they're like you said, like there's a lot of students that are getting involved with like these topics and these discussions, but I feel as though that's still likely a small like group or a small population of students. And so I was just I was thinking like, how do we expose students who aren't attending sessions like these and aren't getting involved like more in exposing them to these topics, and not like forcing them to become educated on it, but integrating it more. And so I was thinking about like students in action and like how we've been talking about changes in the curriculum and general education and incorporating anti-racism education into that, and that's an opportunity to also discuss anti-Asian racism and sentiment and the history of that, which is really important, which you both talked about today as well. But I was wondering, what ideas or things that maybe you all have talked about in terms of getting it more exposure and trying to get more students involved who aren't, readily throwing themselves in to participate.
For me, I think it's really important for it to be discussed in like the classroom setting. I just think that like that's somewhere where everyone goes through the classroom setting, and I think like that's just a common ground that you can meet at and have a variety of students talking. But I think that also takes a lot of effort, and I think sometimes people think like they'll talk about it once and then everyone will think about it forever and you don't have to talk about it again. Like, it's one of those things where you need to keep talking about it and keep bringing it up and have people's perspectives and listen to other people's feelings and experiences. So I think the best way to do it is just like talking about it and being open and honest and kind of listening to other people who have experienced these things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with her. And I was just thinking, so many of the classes where I've learned about this, or if this has been like a significant talking point in conversation, has really been like my gender studies class or my sociology classes. And I feel like if one of those classes was a cornerstone and was a like a have to, but still a choice for students, I think that would really make an impact. So they can have more than just what Liza was saying, like the one conversation. And I also think just having teachers figure out a way to work it in the curriculum. I know my environmental science teacher is doing a really great job focusing on the issues that Black, Brown, and low-income families have and how it relates to environmental science. So he's doing a really good job at that. And so even though like we are doing environmental science, we're also studying environmental racism as well. And I think that's just a really great way to interweave these societal problems that are going on. So I think if teachers can focus some of that into their curriculum, it would be really helpful. Because I also took a writing class as well, and we talked about racism in writing and how that affects our tutoring abilities. So I think if teachers can start making those moves, and maybe there will be like a cornerstone class that's required, and just keep the conversation going throughout the years, I think that's one way that we can definitely work towards the progress that we want to see, and that needs to be done.
I definitely agree with the cornerstone idea. I think that would probably be a good idea, like a requirement for everyone, just because then everyone will definitely get the exposure. And I don't know, I feel like we have cornerstones for like, you have to take a religion course, and not everyone's religious, but everyone has to like be civil and like know how to interact with people of other races. Like, it just seems like kind of common sense that would be a basic course that would benefit everyone in the future and throughout their life. So I think that's a good idea.
Liza, you made a really good point. I think a lot of people make a lot of justifications that it's very too difficult or challenging to talk about topics relating to race, identity, or sexuality, or any other identity when it comes to that. And I think what it is just is unpractice. That's really what's happening at Stonehill and every other institution. It's really unpracticed. And I think what I'm thinking a lot about is training. There are professors who want to do it, even adjuncts, but don't know how to facilitate that conversation. That really goes back to training within the institution itself.
You brought a really great points here. I mean, I totally 100% agree with like what you said. Joseph, you asked this question, so I was also wondering like your thoughts about your own question.
Yeah, I was so I like Eliza and May were saying, like in the Cornerstone program, a lot to incorporate that in there because so I'm a chemistry major, and a lot of our within the classes within our major, there's not like a social science aspect to it. Like environmental science has more of that being able to talk about environmental racism and the impact of climate change and whatnot on underprivileged communities. But in a lot of our chemistry classes, there isn't that aspect because we're just talking about molecules on an atomic level, right? And so it's I think that it's for a lot of students it's really easy just to go through the Cornerstone program and like in your first year and then not engage with these topics at all for the rest of your time at Stonehill, at least in the classroom. But again, if you are going to seek that experience in these discussions outside of the classroom, right, you need to put in the time to, attend these or, get involved in other groups. And it's really easy for students to just not do that. And like Lindy was saying also, it's something that students might not have ever done before. It's not practice. It's not something that they it's not on their radar, which it was something that came up when we were talking in the presentation. Is that a lot of these things, a lot of these ideas that just aren't on the radar of white students and privileged students who don't experience these things, don't think about these things. And then I also like what Glendy was saying, how it also goes back to we need change not only in the students, but also you need change in staff and faculty as well. Staff and faculty need this training to also be working to come up with ideas to talk about these topics in not only the classroom setting. I know that residence life, we've had some conversations about how do we incorporate anti-racism into our residence life curriculum. And so I'm an RA in the courts this year, and I was in O'Hara last year as well. And a lot of RAs have tried to use programs and bulletin boards to get these to get people involved in these discussions. But again, it's difficult because the people who want to show up are going to show up, but a lot of students, that's not going to be on their radar, or they're not going to invest the time into it. So having that introduced, I think like at an early stage, right, in like cornerstone classes and general education requirements, and being introduced to that may open up later on, more involvement in extracurriculars, and then also maybe in some of the, other on-campus discussions and stuff like that, like this session here. So that was just some of the thoughts that I had, but I love hearing more thoughts about that, because it's something that I think that I know that I've struggled having, these conversations as an RA, and I plan on going into higher education as a student affairs professional. So I'm always interested in learning more about how colleges can better integrate, these topics and whatnot into student life, and also into faculty and staff.
Can I make one more comment? I'm really glad to hear that teachers are being more active in getting social topics into their curriculum at Stonehill. It makes me really happy to hear, but I want to make a point that just because it's a natural science, it doesn't excuse that they leave out the social topics, because the natural sciences were researched by social people. So I feel like there's always a place, even in chemistry class, to talk about the women who contributed to chemistry, or the Asians who contributed to chemistry. Just and one concrete example right off the top of my head, a really famous invention that came out of China was fireworks. That's definitely chemistry, and it would be bomb to learn about fireworks in chemistry class, I gotta say. So I think if you want that from your teachers, and I mean, it sounds like they're adding that in by themselves, which is really great, but if you want that from your teachers, probably ask them specifically for it too, because if they know there's a demand for it, they'll be more likely to meet that demand.
That was a really great point. It's 12:02 now. Does anyone have any last things that they're really dying to say?
No, I just want to say thank you to all the panelists in creating this presentation. I learned so much from you all, so I really appreciate you for taking the time to do this.
Thanks, Glendy.
Well, thank you for everyone who's come. Sorry, Liza.
Oh, you're good. Yeah, thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Liza and May, again for working on this presentation. It was really informative. Thank you.
Great. So there are more great presentations. I know some people came from others. So if you want, or if you have time, go to the others. And thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for the presentation.